Bullets and bombs broke Korea in half. Pen and paper pieces it back together.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Debating for America's Youth. Today we're interviewing a very special guest. Today we're going to be interviewing Hunter Brown, who is the 2019 NSDA National Champion in Congressional Debate for the House. Welcome, Hunter.
Howdy. Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So to begin, how did you first hear about speech and debate, and what made you want to stick with the club after you joined?
So, growing up, I was a very argumentative child, to put it bluntly, and eventually I found out that there was a way to do that in a way that was far more intellectual and in a way that would actually gain me something when it came to the college process and also just a sense of self-confidence. Growing up, I was always incredibly interested in things like public speaking and policy and general issues regarding the nation, but it was very hard for me to articulate these thoughts properly. What I needed was a way to learn how to actually find that voice, was a way to deliver that message, and that's what brought me to speech and debate. And what really hooked me about the activity was seeing not necessarily myself speak, but after going to my first tournament, it was watching some of the best debaters in my circuit and the captivation they had on the room. These were experts of rhetoric, of logic, of reason, who were able to hold the interest of a room not through a specific instrument or a specific talent, but exclusively through the way they introduced their ideas and the ways they articulated those thoughts. The power of persuasion that they had in that moment was something that interested me so much, just being able to do that. And ever since I saw them speak, that's what really hooked me to this activity going forward.
Yeah, I would definitely say my story would be very similar. What specifically about Congress hooked you in versus the other debate or even speech events?
So I also did dabble a lot in extemporaneous speaking, but what I specifically enjoyed about congressional debate, as opposed to just normal forms of debate, was the fact that it didn't just put emphasis on logical refutation, but also the need for emotional appeal as well. I think one of the most important things we need to remember when we're considering issues of public policy or of rational conversation is the fact that these messages should be articulated and should be possible to articulate to average citizens. They need to understand each and every policy issue as well, and the only way to keep their interest is to rely on things like emotional appeal. Because Congress represented that mixture of both logical debate as well as those persuasive and rhetorical devices that kept people captivated, that's what specifically made the activity stand out for me.
Definitely.
While the last bullet of the Korean Civil War was fired 70 years ago, even today, neither side is willing to put down the barrel of the gun. Across a consistent arms buildup, tensions have remained at an all-time high, making American presence the only thing stopping them from pulling the trigger. This is our chance to keep it that way. Pass this legislation. First, this ends short-sighted South Korean policy because Section 1 forces the executive to consider a broader implication of strategy, not just the short-term cost of troops. Now, Mr. Shintakayala is absolutely correct. Right now, we do have a lack of data, but it doesn't just affect this Congress, it affects our president as well. Since the beginning of 2019, for 50 years, we agreed that our troops were necessary to stop North Korean invasion. But in the status quo, our president has railed against the cost without considering the long-term benefits. And it's not just political posturing, it's already our political reality in the Middle East. In fact, as Fortune furthers, on February 5th of 2019, our Syrian troop withdrawal happened with President Trump not even alerting the top general of Syrian operations before he engaged in the effort. Right now, foreign policy is shaped by instinct, not intelligence. It is shaped by rhetoric, not reality. That's what this legislation changes. We force our executive to consider all 5 sections under this legislation. Representative Cohen, I understand that chemical weapons are a necessity, but considering any broader implications is still inherently better than what we have today. Without this policy in place, President Trump's inflammatory rhetoric could potentially lead North Korea and South Korea to the end-all be-all, global catastrophe. In fact, as the Stimson Center for Global Security furthers on October 4th of 2017, in the event of an actual doomsday nuclear arms race with South Korea, we could see 1.3 to 3.8 million casualties in just 72 hours. We can make as many mistakes as we want to on the negotiation table, but on the nuclear battlefield, there are 0 second chances. Next, pass this legislation because it inherently checks back on executive war power, because Section 3 of this bill requires the Secretary of Defense to argue their case to congressional committees. Now, 3 separate speakers, Representatives Rosby, Cohen, and Allen, have all told you that under Section 2C, we're going to see the DoD certify their own report. Even if that's the case, remember, they still have to give us a report too. We can evaluate whether or not it's a good idea to leave South Korea. We can scrutinize the president's decision, and it's already been effective. In fact, as the New York Times furthers on December 4th of 2018, we used this exact policy in Saudi Arabia. When the CIA briefed us on the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, we used our influence in a bipartisan breakthrough to end arms sales to Saudi Arabia. We can stop the president. We can pass this bill. Bullets and bombs broke Korea in half. Pen and paper pieces it back together.
When you're in a Congress round, do you prefer giving earlier speeches or do you prefer giving more extemporaneous or rebuttal speeches later in the round?
See, and maybe this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but in my case, it's always been a bit of a preference for both. Like, I like in most rounds to try to have an even mix of both early round and late round, because I think both are equally important and as equally interesting. I mean, if you give a powerful first round speech, you are setting the precedent, setting the tone, setting the pace that this round's going to function at. You have every single other person's attention because you're putting forward the initial ideas and those initial values that the rest of the round is going to be predicated on. That being said, being able to give a late round speech and completely topple the opponents of the opposition, or just completely reverse everyone's logical assumptions in the round and demonstrate some fallacy that everybody missed, can both be equally powerful in terms of appealing to a judge, but also just equally fun to give.
Definitely. When you're in a round, how do you stand out for the judges?
So, especially in national rounds, I believe that everyone to a certain degree is capable of formulating a logical argument. There is definitely going to be some exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, everyone is going to be sound when it comes to their research, when it comes to their data, and when it comes to their ability to link those to the legislation. What I think specifically helps stand out in those moments, and what was always the bread and butter for me, was just rhetoric, but specifically personal narratives. Not about myself, but about the human interest behind each and every piece of legislation we're debating. I think very often in this activity, we can get very, very tangled in logical analysis and empirical data that we can sometimes forget that behind each and every single one of those statistics is a story. There are people, there are lives at stake, and being able to articulate their emotions, their values, and the narrative behind them is always what I saw as what helped me stand out in rounds of amazingly intelligent and amazingly skilled debaters.
I completely agree. I talk a lot about on this channel about like making strong impacts, especially relating it to like humans specifically. Like if you tell a story, and a story is, I mean, so much more powerful than just a number sometimes. So I totally agree with that. What practices do you do for speech and debate when you're preparing for a competition?
So, speech and debate, I mean, there is the number one practice that you're going to have to get familiar with is going to be start-stop. Just not giving a full speech, but being cut off the second you make a mistake or the second you fail in some way, whether it be a fluency break or a certain unclear link, is going to be the only real way you can notice in the moment when these issues are happening and how you should be correcting for them. In terms of specific activity-based drills, something I was always a big fan of and was generally a carryover from extemporaneous speech was filibustering, in which you have somebody, maybe a coach or a friend, give you an extemp question or just a general political topic, and your goal is to talk as long as possible without having a fluency break. These kinds of drills, in my mind, always provided a really good way to practice coming up with logic and coming up with explanations on the fly, especially considering that each and every debate round should in some degree flow differently or flow uniquely. You need to be prepared for those moments by having that built-in ability to reason, that built-in ability to rationalize, no matter what the issue is. Outside of that, I think an activity that helps a lot with emotional delivery that I would always do is I would try to give a speech in one exaggerated emotion. Whether that would be very happy, very angry, very sad, any or all of the above, what you want to do in these situations is learn to feel comfortable with extremes of the emotion so you can find that balance. You have to practice getting outside of your comfort zone and practice being a character if you ever want to sell judges on the emotional impacts behind a speech.
Interesting. So you were talking about fluency breaks. When you have a fluency break during your actual speech, during the competition, how do you adjust for that?
Well, the number one thing that you need to remember about fluency breaks, and this is advice that I would give to anyone, is the fact that the second it happens, the only thing you can do next is keep going. Generally, an issue a lot of amateur or sophomore debaters will have is that when they have a fluency break, they will spend the rest of their time mentally worried about the fluency break, and at that point, when you're obsessed with the break, it's going to continue to happen. This is a train that's gone off the rails, and it's only going to get worse from there. What you need to do to adjust for a fluency break is slow down and just continue focusing on the speech ahead. The one thing that's going to call attention to a fluency break is going back and trying to correct for it. All you have to do is keep powering through it. This happens to basically every major debater, and the one thing that can save your speech, because it doesn't need saving at that point, is just to continue in the element, continue the logic, continue the reason, continue the narrative that you were telling before.
That makes sense. This is a personal question that I've been wondering about. When you're preparing for a tournament, do you prepare rebuttal for specific points that you think are going to be made, or do you have unique points that you use as rebuttal if someone makes the opposite point, I guess?
So I think to some degree, you always need to be prepared for both sides of an issue. Insofar as preparing specific rebuttals, if there are certain debate bills that get tossed around a lot, whether that be, for instance, like cutting arms sales to Saudi Arabia or foreign aid in general, you're going to see the same arguments being made. And so in those situations, I think it's good to have some data that's in the back that is ready to refute commonly made arguments on either the affirmation or the negation. That being said, I do think having some unique arguments is a good idea, but so I think that it's not mutually exclusive. I think both of these are equally important to have inside of a prep doc. It's crucial to remember that you should never be preparing to give a speech. You should be preparing for a round. And to prepare for a round, you're going to need to have unique information. You're going to need to have rebuttal data. All of that's a part of the larger conversation that's going to happen, and you need to be ready for it to evolve.
That's interesting. So what is your process when actually preparing data for a tournament? Do you begin by reading overview of the topic, or how do you go about finding your arguments and researching?
Well, it really depends on the issue. I think to some degree, you are never going to get anywhere if you immediately jump into the core and just the absolute meat of argumentation over a topic that you don't understand. The first thing you're going to need to do is look for general overview information. After that, it's important to remember that you need to take time to reflect as well. There was always three big questions I would ask myself when I was making an argument, and also when I was looking at information or other opinion pieces being made about a piece of legislation. It was what, how, and why. First of all, what is the problem? What is the problem this bill is trying to address, or what are the problems made worse by this bill? Second, how is it affected by the bill? In essence, how does this bill fix the problem that was just mentioned, or how is it making a problem worse? And the final question is why. Why does that matter? These are the three questions I would use to frame a lot of the argumentation and a lot of the information I found online, because in essence here, we can end up in a situation where we go down a rabbit hole. We look up all these obscure sources, all these obscure data points, and that's all well and great. But if we don't know how it applies to the larger conversation, to the bill itself, it's irrelevant.
Interesting. with questioning, do you often come up with most of your questions during the round, or do you have questions that you think of when you're researching for the bill?
In any situation, I think it is better to frame your questions around the speeches that you're hearing. Having stock questions is a really surefire way to become very untopical during a conversation or to appear relevant when you're actually questioning somebody. You need to frame your questions around the logical fallacies presented by the debate that's happening inside of the round, not the debate that you're having inside of your head. That being said, if you think there are specific issues or fallacies within the bill itself and the author gives a speech, maybe in that situation you should have questions ready. Other than that, I think a majority of your questions are going to need to come from the speakers that are bringing up the arguments, not ideas that you've already had prior to the round.
Interesting. So you talked about how you've always been one for argumentation and you wanted to apply it better. When you started out in debate, were you nervous in front of speaking in front of people, or did it come naturally to you, or how did that work out?
Oh, it was a nerve-wracking experience. My first few tournaments, while prelims was always easier when it came to confidence and being myself in round, any finals round performance, I found myself choking because I put such incredible pressure on myself and only thought about it under the assumption that I would lose. I constantly spent all my time worrying about what could go wrong, about what I'd be doing badly. And what turned around for me and helped me develop as a speaker was recognizing that the only person in that round that I needed to impress was myself. Your number one opposition at any given point in debate is always going to be the person that you are. You are your worst critic. You are your worst judge. You are going to be the hardest on yourself. If you can make yourself happy, no matter how good the people in the room are, that has been a success. That tournament has been a successful tournament. You have built your character. You have built your skill. That's all you should be worried about. It was that focus on pleasing myself, that focus on hitting those core talents and focusing on the speech, not just on the people and the pressure and the worries, that helped me get better as a speaker going forward.
Sounds like some good feedback. What would you tell a novice who is just getting started in congressional debate that you haven't already said in this interview?
Something that I would always want to tell congressional debaters at a novice level is you cannot be afraid to fail. Every single major debater, every single national champion you can think of from any year of the NSDA or, from debate prior has had a moment or a round or a tournament where they have completely dropped the ball. What matters is that they didn't stop trying. The only way you can truly be defeated in this activity is the moment where you accept your performance for how it is and stop thinking of ways to improve. You are going to fail. There is going to be moments of setback. There is going to be moments of disappointment. The only thing you can do wrong in those moments is give up. Always be trying to improve, never be afraid to take chances, and always be willing to learn something new about the activity.
Definitely. And I think my final question for this interview is going to be, what would you like to tell the speech and debate community now that you have graduated and moved on to college?
In terms of, in what sense? Like, what do you want me to...
Many people have answered this question in different ways. I guess one piece of advice for the speech and debate community as a whole, not just congressional debaters.
That's fair. For the speech and debate community as a whole, remember that at the end of the day, we need to put our emphasis on character, not on competition. The reason why this activity matters is not because you win a plastic trophy at a national tournament. The reason why this activity matters isn't because you're at the top of some abstract chart or list or bid points. None of that is the reason why we do this. The reason why we do this activity is because of the social connections we make, the genuine friendships we find, and most importantly, the skill that we build as a result of this activity. Focus on the people that you're around. You are surrounded by so many intelligent, genuinely amazing people who you have the chance to get to know on a personal level. Make those friendships lasting, because the success isn't necessarily going to be. All tournament championships, all tournament titles are temporary. What is permanent in this activity are the people that you meet and the personal skills that you walk away with.
I completely agree with your sentiment. I think that, yeah, a lot of times people can get caught up in trying to, get the next achievement, but really they miss out on what makes speech and debate great. And honestly, during this whole quarantine time, not being able to go to my state tournament or national qualifiers or even nationals, it's made me kind of think about all the things that I miss about speech and debate, and not just about trying to perform the best I can at these tournaments. So I completely agree with your sentiment. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure a lot of people will be helped by this, and I especially was as well.
Thank you for having me.